Hello and welcome to another episode of the Brandon Ramsey College Basketball Show. We're recording today's episode live here at 1 p.m. on Monday, February 17th. We will get some people. Um, we will get some people into the live chat here momentarily. I'm trying to produce on the fly just a little bit. It looks like we have some issues on Twitter, but that's okay. We will get things loaded up here on YouTube still. Um, we have a lot to talk about here coming out of a busy weekend on the college basketball slate. Auburn remaining number one with a big win over Alabama. We had an impressive win by Houston at Arizona. A lot going on in the Big Ten. Kentucky unfortunately collapsed down in Austin against Texas. But we will get into all of that and much more. But first, please make sure you are subscribed to us here at the Brandon Ramsey College Basketball Show on YouTube. If that's where you're watching, please leave a like. You can hop into the comments throughout the show, and I'll get to your questions or thoughts as I can. Also, make sure you're following me on Twitter at BRamseyKSR. That's the best place to stay up to date with everything that I'm doing. But we do have these podcasts every Monday and Friday, and then the live YouTube show on Wednesdays at 12:30 p.m. Eastern Time, all fired up with Brandon Ramsey. I'm going to make sure everything is now working in terms of live streaming capabilities here. Looks like we are good to go on Twitter now as well. So thank you all as you tune in today. And we are going to start with Auburn's win in Tuscaloosa on Saturday. Obviously, this was not just the game of the weekend, but one of the biggest games of the college basketball season so far. There's only so many times where you get number one versus number two. Tanner, what's up, man? Thanks for being here today. But only so many opportunities that you get number one versus number two, and we were treated to that this weekend. The Southeastern Conference is obviously one of the best conferences that we've seen in college basketball in the last multiple decades. At this point, is trending towards, and now we had the two best teams match up with one another, and it really solidified Auburn as the best team in college basketball. I think that those of us that kept the Tigers number one in the country, despite their loss now 2 weeks ago to Florida, were certainly vindicated, because I thought that you kind of needed to use this Saturday as the litmus test. If Alabama would have taken down Auburn, then I think Alabama would have deserved to move to number one. But it was just too early to do that last week, and I think that we saw that play out on the court in Tuscaloosa on Saturday. Janai Broome was once again just spectacular. It just seems like that everything that he does is just inevitable at this point. He's going to give you what he gives you every time out, and there's certainly a conversation to be had, and we'll probably dive deeper into it as we get closer to March on this show. But I've said it before, I continue to look at the National Player of the Year discussion sort of through this lens. I do think that Cooper Flagg is the best basketball player in the country. But it would be really hard for me to submit a vote that didn't have Janai Broome's name on it if I were turning it in today, because he means so incredibly much to the best team in college basketball. Now, I get it. You could say, hey, Brandon, you idiot. Remember when Duke beat Auburn? Yeah, I remember that. But I still think, Janai Broome last night, or on Saturday night, 19 points, 14 rebounds, 6 assists. What he does, even kind of while being hobbled a little bit too, for a team, and this is what we're going to get into here a little bit, for a team that has one of the best resumes that we have seen in a while. Obviously, it's been since 1976 since we saw a team run the table and go undefeated when the Indiana Hoosiers won the national championship. And Auburn certainly, they have 2 losses. They lost at home to Florida on the 8th, and then they went to Cameron Indoor Stadium and lost to Duke back in early December. But this is a team that's 14 quad one victories. I tweeted this out earlier today, again, at BRamseyKSR. There's only one other team in college basketball that has played more than 14 quad one games. That actually happens to be the Kentucky Wildcats, who are 8-7 in quadrant one. And I think there's 4 other teams, Arizona, Illinois, South Carolina, and one more that I'm forgetting that have also played 14. But Auburn has 14 quad one victories, 14-2 in quad one. Not only have they played the toughest schedule in college basketball, but they have the best resume, they have the best record, they are the best team in college basketball. And that is incredibly, incredibly impressive, especially when you consider looking at their schedule still to come. They have what? Probably at least 4, maybe 5 quad one regular season games. What we're talking about by the end of the SEC tournament, it is very likely that this team, that Auburn's going to enter the NCAA tournament with 20 or more quad one wins. Travis in the chat, hey, what's up, Trav? He says, are they better than UConn, or asks if they're better than UConn last year? It's hard to, I mean, that's a tough question. I wouldn't necessarily say that they're better, but like they're having a better season, if that makes sense. Like, we've talked about it all year long, and I think it is playing out to be true that the Southeastern Conference is one of the best leagues that we've seen in decades, and Auburn is kind of just running right through it with only 1 loss in the league, 2 losses overall, and they happen to be to 2 other teams who are right now tracking towards being number 1 seeds. Last season, Connecticut went 37-3. So it's certainly hard to pick against them. They won every NCAA tournament game by double figures for a second straight season. So I'm not necessarily going to say that Auburn is the best team. Just like, there's a reason why I use the word resume. I don't think that this Auburn team is one of the best teams we've seen in 2 decades, but I do think that they're going to turn in one of the best resumes that we've seen in the last 2 decades. And maybe those things should, maybe those 2 statements should mean the same thing. And maybe I'm, trying to outsmart myself by separating them. But at least for now, I'm going to kind of continue to explain it in that way. They had 6 scores in double figures on Saturday against Alabama. Obviously mentioned Janai Broome leading the way with 19 points, but then you had Denver Jones shooting 3 of 5 from 3-point range, 16 points. You had Miles Kelly with 15 points, Chad Baker-Mazara, who just continues to play at a very, very high level, 15 points for him off the bench. Chaney Johnson, 14 off the bench. Todd Pettiford, 13 off the bench. It is just incredible. And they beat Alabama at their own game to some extent, too. 12 of 30 from 3 for 40% for Auburn. Alabama was 5 of 26, I believe. Mark Sears goes 2 of 11. And that is one of the ongoing concerns still for this Alabama team. We talked about it on this show early in the season that I didn't think this Alabama team was going to shoot it as well as they did last season. That has certainly turned out to be the case. Now, what Alabama has done to combat that, and why I was buying stock in Alabama pretty early on, after admittedly being a little bit lower on them in the preseason, was they've been so elite at the rim. They put pressure on the rim, whether it be lob threats or Mark Sears driving it, the Baron Philon driving it, Aiden Holloway driving it. These guys can score in the paint now at such a high level that it's covered up some of, not their shooting woes, but just them not being 37% from 3 on insane volume. Now they still have insane volume, but they're 33, 34% on the season, much more middle of the pack in terms of their percentage from 3-point range. But there's still going to be games where, and this can bite you in a hurry in March Madness, when what happens when Alabama does go 5 for 26. Now, again, because of those things that I mentioned, because they can get to the basket, because they're better defensively than they have been, I think that keeps them from losing in the first or second round. I don't, certainly not losing to a 15 or 16 seed with this team, regardless of what they shoot. I don't even see them losing to an 8-9, or, if they somehow fell to a 2 seed, if they, played a 7 or a 10. I don't think they're losing to those teams. I think they're getting there to the second weekend almost regardless, again, because of their ability to get to the rim, score in the paint, defend a little bit, all of that. But once you start playing those better and better teams, could you get tripped up on the night where you go 5 for 26? Yeah, it's certainly possible, but this team does have some more preventative measures so to speak, to keep from some of that of happening. But again, just so much credit goes to Coach Bruce Pearl. I believe that I heard something that he's now, I think he's maybe the first coach ever to win a number one versus number two matchup at two different schools. When he was at Tennessee, he, as number one with the Vols, beat number two Memphis. And then now, obviously, number one Auburn taking down number two Alabama. So incredible performance by Auburn. That one more thing I want to mention. I always say this about Auburn, and sort of giving some flowers to their fans and their home court advantage. I really thought it was true against Alabama as well. And it speaks to the way these teams play with their length and athleticism, the way they really pressure you kind of on both ends of the floor, offensive pressure and defensive pressure. But when you watch Alabama and Auburn play, this is true when they're not playing each other, and it was 10 times true watching them play each other. They make the court seem so small. It is insane, like how quickly they get end to end, how much room, how they spread it sideline to sideline, as well as very impressive just with the spacing that they create. All the fans, it feels like they're right on top of you. The people that sit in the front row at both Auburn and Alabama, like they're insane. And obviously these people probably are either famous or wealthy or both in order to get those tickets, but they're not just some casual fans. Like these people are up in the same way that the coaches are up on the other side, like on the other sideline. These guys are up screaming at players, screaming at officials. It's like it all just kind of feels like the entire gym is on top of the court. But I just say that to say these two teams, Alabama lost the game. They're still one of the 3, 4, 5 best teams in college basketball. Absolutely. Speaking of which, within that same list is certainly the Houston Cougars at this point. Again, we've mentioned this on this show a handful of times throughout the season, but there was a period of time early in the season where I was down on this Houston team. I didn't think that people were making a big enough deal about the fact that Jamal Shead was no longer their point guard. And I thought that the transition from Jamal Shead, a first-team All-American, to Milos Uzan was not being mentioned enough, or it wasn't being factored in enough when we talked about what this Houston team was going to be this season. And I felt somewhat vindicated when they ended November 4-3. Now you go back and look at those losses. They were by 5 points to Auburn. They were by 5 points in overtime to Alabama, and they were by 3 points in overtime to San Diego State. But still, they lost some of those games. They're 4-3. Well, all they've done since then is win 17 of their last 18 games. They're now 13-1 in the Big 12, up 2 games. They came from the AAC into the Big 12 last year, immediately won it by 2 games. Now they're winning it by 2 games once again. Coach Kelvin Sampson, one of the best basketball coaches in the game, period, point blank. It's just incredible what he continues to turn out year after year at Houston. But they go into Arizona on Saturday and win 62-58 in a game that was certainly not easy for them. I mean, the score indicates that it was a rock fight, and that was certainly true while watching it. It was not the prettiest basketball game that you've ever seen, but they excel really at winning games like that because they can rebound the heck out of the ball. That they just make you so uncomfortable offensively because of their defensive pressure 1 through 5. And then it was Uzan who stepped up and played outstanding. He's really starting to look like, no, he's not an All-American in the way that Jamal Shead was, but maybe he doesn't have to be an All-American like Jamal Shead was. But he is certainly looking like an All-Big 12 player now. He had 19 points and 5 assists on Saturday. And like I said, he was the reason why I had some hesitations about this team. And just game to game, week to week, month to month, he started to sort of calm those fears that I had about him running the point for Coach Kelvin Sampson's team. Down the stretch, they do have a very tough go of it. They're at Arizona State on Tuesday, then they host the Cyclones of Iowa State, then they go to Texas Tech, host Cincy, host Kansas, and then they finish up at Baylor. There's 6 tough games, but they've certainly navigated the minefield of the Big 12 to this point. If they go certainly 5-1 down the stretch, they're good to go. They probably can even win it by going 4-2 and just sort of hold and serve here in these final 6. But you do have to go back. When I read off those first 3 losses, then their 4th loss is by 1 point against Texas Tech in a game that we talked about extensively on this show. But so that's 4 losses by a combined 14 points and 3 overtime periods. This team is incredibly close to being undefeated. Now, I get it. You say that, and they have 4 losses. I get it. But when you just look back at the wins at their schedule, it's incredible what this Houston team has done this season. And I'm still not sure if even at this point enough people are mentioning them because we get so hung up on the SEC and then obviously Duke to some extent. It's time that we throw Houston into that basket as a legitimate national title contender. For much of this season, I was beating the drum of Iowa State, and I still believe that they're right on the cusp of that. They've probably fallen from title contender to Final Four contender, sort of in my mental tier list, with Houston replacing them. But I do think that as we talk about Auburn, Alabama, Florida, obviously Duke, Houston is that 5th team at this point that has solidified themselves as a legitimate national championship contender. Switching gears now into the Big Ten. This continues to be a very, very fun league to follow at the top. And we had Michigan on Sunday evening play Ohio State, beat the Buckeyes 86-83 in Columbus. This was a really, really fun game for those of you who were tuned in on Sunday afternoon. Vlad Golden continues to be excellent after following Coach Dusty May from Florida Atlantic to Ann Arbor. He had 20 points and 10 rebounds on Sunday. Danny Wolf, one of my favorite players to watch in the country, 17 points, 11 rebounds, 5 assists. Obviously, I'm a Kentucky fan. If you enjoy watching Amari Williams play basketball, Danny Wolf is a more skilled version of Amari Williams. He's just as good. He's probably even still a better passer, but then he can also make threes. He can still get you 10 rebounds a game, and he just handles the ball even more like a guard. He is just a junior, so could we see him enter the portal again? I don't want to speculate people into the portal, but man, he is fun to watch, and him and Vlad Golden playing together as kind of twin towers there in Ann Arbor are a big reason why Michigan is out in front in the Big Ten this season at 12-2, 20-5 overall after winning 6 straight. And they have a big game coming up on Friday night against Michigan State. Obviously, a rivalry there in the state of Michigan. It's in Ann Arbor with 2 teams battling it at the top of the conference. Michigan State is 11-3 in second place now by themselves after Purdue took another loss. They're at 11-4. Michigan all alone at 12-2. Going back to that Ohio State game, I thought that going into it, I thought the Ohio State backcourt would be enough to win it kind of against the Wolverines' front court. And that wasn't necessarily wrong. And if you would have told me that Devin Royal, one of the forwards for Ohio State, was going to score 26 points in this game like he did, he was 3 of 5 from 3, played one of his best games of the season. If you would have told me that he had 26 points, Bruce Thornton had 17, John Mobley would hit 3 threes and have 16 points, I would have said, man, yeah, I feel really good about my pick for Ohio State. But that's just how good Vlad Gold and Danny Wolf and those guys were. And the Ohio State just couldn't get a stop really at any point in this game. So really impressive performance from Michigan heading into, as I mentioned, that big game against Sparty on Friday. We have Cam in the chat here, says, I love watching Houston play. I'd love to have a Kentucky team that plays that style of defense eventually. It's a lot of fun to watch. One of the things, and this isn't, like, I don't think this is a shot at anything, or I don't think this is like just kind of giving up on the ultimate dream or anything like that, but it is hard if you're going to play defense like a Tennessee or like a Houston or to some extent even like a St. John's. It's hard to have the elite offense that Kentucky has and guard like that. Now, I know you can look and say, like, well, Brandon, Houston has the number 10 offense. Yeah, I mean, absolutely in terms of efficiency, but if you want to score 80 points a game, if you want to shoot 33s a game, if you want to be top 25 nationally in pace, you're just not going to have that. Now, we can certainly, debate which one we'd rather have. Trust me, I have nothing against having a Houston level defense. I'm just saying that if you, and I'm not saying that you don't like this, you just had the comment that made me think about it, Cam, but if you like Kentucky's offense, now Kentucky's defense can get a heck of a lot better while maintaining a really good offense, but it's probably not realistic to think that Kentucky can maintain the style of offense and ever really have a Houston type of defense. Is just probably not the way the game works. Speaking of Kentucky, and I want to go ahead and tweet this out real quick just to get some more people in here. We do have to talk about, unfortunately, the collapse of the Wildcats on Saturday in Austin. It was 36 minutes of some pretty darn good basketball, and then it was 4 minutes of something that none of us even want to think about or talk about really as Kentucky fans. Now, there's a lot of prefaces and caveats to throw out there. We know that the Wildcats are working with a depleted roster. I'm probably the champion of saying that on Twitter at BRamseyKSR. Most teams are going to really, really struggle if you take away their second leading scorer, who's their starting point guard and by far best defender. Most people are going to struggle when you take away their third leading scorer, who's one of their other best playmakers. And then most teams are going to struggle when you take away their backup point guard. Kentucky's without all three of those people at the same time. And they were tasked on Saturday with going on the road to Austin to play a quad 1A game. Now, let me quickly mention that. There's a lot of people who probably have not watched a Texas game all season until Saturday that have then taken it upon themselves to be smarter than the quad system. It's not my opinion that Texas is a quad 1A team. It's not my opinion that Kentucky was underdogs on Saturday. It's not my opinion that Kentucky had three of their best players, or certainly three of the best playmakers, out. You're not supposed to go into circumstances like that. Like, quad 1A games are supposed to be hard to win at full strength, even for top 15 teams like Kentucky. It should be darn near impossible to win them when you just rattled off the list of absences that Kentucky had. Now, in fairness, Arthur Kaluma didn't play for Texas either. So, but let's face it, having Lamont Butler, Jackson Robinson, and Kirk Risa out, the pendulum is still in Texas' favor with missing Kaluma when you're comparing injuries. Now, you say all that, and you fast forward the game, and with 3 minutes and 51 seconds to go, Kentucky's up by 5 points. And the way that Kentucky collapsed down the stretch ultimately had very little to do with not having those guys, which was unfortunate. Now, the Travis Perry turnover, yeah, if you have Lamont Butler, do you not turn it over there? Yeah, maybe, but let's face it, if Travis Perry ever wants to play at Kentucky, he's going to have to be able to enter the ball into offense. He can do that, and he needs to be able to do that. And then it's Amari Williams, who is one of the best defensive rebounders in all of college basketball, who just doesn't box out on a free throw. Just walks under the rim because it's Trey Johnson who's shooting it. He's 88%. He's assuming he's going to make it. And I don't think Amari Williams is a soft player. It was a soft play. It was. It just was. It was soft. There's no other way to say it. That's a lack of toughness to not, in the biggest situation of the game, put your butt into the guy, carve out space, and get a rebound, because Kentucky still would have had a very, really, really good chance to win at that point. Then you come down, you have a bad offensive possession, you give up a bucket on the other end, and then you just fail to inbound the ball. You can't get the ball inbounded. Again, it was token pressure at best from Texas. It doesn't matter if your starting point guard and your backup point guard aren't in. You and me and a few buddies from the chat here could have inbounded the ball in that circumstance. So it was really, really frustrating to watch Kentucky lose that game, because not only was it just, hey, we all want Kentucky to win the games, but you know that with the depleted roster in one of the toughest conferences we've seen in 20 years, the wins are going to be few and far between. They're going to be hard to come by. They're hard enough to come by again as it is, but with no Butler, no Robinson, no Creasa, it can get kind of scary when you think about these next 6 games and where do the wins come. So when you have a chance, and people got mad at me on Twitter of talking about stealing one in Austin. Guess what, folks? Yeah, it would have been stealing one. You're missing your second, third leading scorer and your backup point guard. You're playing a quad 1A road game. You're an underdog. Yes, you would have stolen it in that circumstance, and there's nothing wrong with that. Heck, I'll steal games the rest of the year. I don't care if we're supposed to win them, if we're not supposed to win them. I just want to have more points than the opponent on the scoreboard at the end of the game. And Kentucky put themselves in a position to do that, and now it puts a ton of pressure on you coming back to Rupp Arena with the depleted roster. Like, you have to beat Vanderbilt on Wednesday, or you do start to really watch that seed go down. Kentucky was announced as a 3 seed on Saturday, number 10 overall. Obviously, you take that loss, maybe you fall a little bit, but the other thing that most people don't understand is that these quad 1, especially the quad 1A road losses, they just don't really hurt you, because guess what? Everybody suffers those. That's not unique to Kentucky. Essentially, if you don't have Auburn, maybe Alabama, maybe Florida, maybe Duke, maybe Houston, if you don't have those names across your chest, everybody else is losing those games too. So those games, like, it just doesn't hurt you in the way that it maybe hurts the feelings of some fans. And I was right there with you. Like, I woke up Sunday. I texted in my group chat with Stephen Peak and Zach Gagan, my co-hosts on Zoom Action on the Kentucky Sports Radio YouTube channel. I was like, I woke up Sunday morning, like, in my head, it was like something wrong actually happened. Like, it was like something bad actually happened in my life, which is, maybe sad, but that's the way that it kind of felt for a minute. I was like, okay, yeah, actually, no, everything's okay. Kentucky just lost a basketball game yesterday. But that was how frustrating it was, because you had that opportunity to get one, and now you have a ton of pressure to beat Vanderbilt at home. You have a ton of pressure to beat LSU at home when they come on March 4th, and then you just have to maybe try to steal one other one again, because at this point it's just about kicking the can down the road. And I think if you can get to 9-9 in the SEC, I know that's not what we all dreamt at the start of the year, and especially as we racked up all these big wins. But in this given scenario, if you can get there and just avoid playing on Wednesday of the SEC tournament, it might be about as good as you can ask for. Another comment from Cam here in the YouTube chat says, one positive about this potentially tough stretch with Lamont and Jackson out is the young guys will have and will continue to get great experience. That's exactly right. Like, in the moment, I don't really care about that. Like, I would rather be winning the games with Lamont Butler, Jackson Robinson, and I would rather Travis Perry and Trent Noah have never played a meaningful minute this season. And that's no shot at them. I think that's just what would have made Kentucky the best, obviously. But I do think that it's undeniable that not only is this big for their confidence, because you've already kind of gotten some of that growth period out of them, sort of being scared of coming in the game when they have Kentucky across their chest. We're well past that point now. So when those guys come back as sophomores, whatever role they're in, they're going to be more ready to excel in that role than they would have been otherwise. And yeah, it's frustrating. Like, again, it's no shot to those guys to say, I wish they weren't playing in the games. But yeah, it's good for them. Like, regardless of how big of a role they ever play, again, whatever role that is, they'll be better off for it. Quickly, a few things I want to touch on here, kind of rapid fire down the stretch. Maryland. If you follow me on Twitter, again, at BRamseyKSR, you know how much I love this Maryland team. Derek Queen, Jacoby Gillespie, Julian Reese, these guys are awesome. Maryland was down 4 points yesterday and came back to win against Iowa, 101-57. Just an incredible performance. This Terrapins team, they are a team that, I'm the person that fills out all 20 or whatever ESPN brackets you're allowed to fill out. I'm going to have Maryland in the Final Four of a couple of them. I can tell you that right now. They are a really tough team to beat. They have an excellent point guard in Jacoby Gillespie, and then with Reese and with Derek Queen inside, they just can beat you in a lot of ways. And this Maryland team is really, really fun to watch, and they showed that again. They've now won 7 of their last 8 in the Big Ten. You had a shocking loss from the two-time defending national champion Connecticut Huskies on Saturday, losing to Seton Hall, who had one win previously in Big East play. Even more shocking is the fact that in KenPom, Seton Hall's win probability was 0.9% when they trailed by 7 points with 45 seconds to go in regulation. Seton Hall also led by 5 points late in overtime and blew both of those leads to a Seton Hall team that even after the win is still 204th in KenPom. I forget who it was. I apologize, or I would give them credit, but one of the national folks put out that this was one of the worst wins or worst losses of a defending champion in the KenPom era, with Seton Hall being ranked in the 200s. So a really bad loss for Connecticut, who's now 17-8, 9-5, and they have a couple it's kind of baffling losses along the way, but you got to think the Huskies will bounce back at some point. Memphis also took their second quad 3 loss. I said this on Twitter. I know there's some Kentucky fans that are frustrated with being, I think, what is it now, 7 and something against top 15 teams and like 1-4 against bubble teams and unranked teams and all that. Memphis takes that and they turn it up to 11. They're 5-2 in quad 1. I believe they're undefeated in quad 2, and then they have 2 quad 3 losses. Like, they don't just lose to not top 25 teams. They lose to straight up some bad teams. They lost to Wichita State in overtime on Sunday, 84-79. So both them and the Huskies took some bad losses. Shout out to Coach Richard Pitino and the New Mexico Lobos. They are now 22-4, 14-1 in the Mountain West Conference after taking care of business and beating Utah State yesterday, 82-79. I watched much of that game. Donovan Dent has really solidified himself as one of the best guards in college basketball. Again, I hate speaking transfers into existence, but if he were to transfer after this season, he will be one of the hottest commodities in the portal at the high major level. You also have True Washington, who stepped up, I believe, at like 26 in this game, was just flame throwing from beyond the arc. We're definitely in a position now where the Lobos can go on and win the Mountain West Conference. They're going to get a pretty good seed in the NCAA tournament, have a chance to make some noise, and I think you could see Richard Pitino, if he wants to leave, he's going to get another shot at a high major job. Travis puts in the chat when you're talking about Doug Gottlieb at Green Bay. Hey, congrats to Coach Gottlieb. Got his first Horizon League win of the season yesterday against Wright State. They are now 3 and whatever they are. They broke the longest losing streak in college basketball. I believe that Green Bay had lost 21 straight. So shout out to Coach Doug Gottlieb. I'm not sure what time his radio show is, but I'm sure he's celebrating on the airwaves just as I am here in Indiana. But 2 big games to watch tonight. Duke is at Virginia. Any chance you get to watch Cooper Flag, and I think this is a unique opportunity. If you're just kind of a casual college basketball fan, and now that football's over, maybe you're trying to get more in to the college basketball scene, not much else going on your Monday night. Sit down and watch Duke tonight at Virginia. It's 8 o'clock on ESPN. Cooper Flag is worth watching. You're going to want to have watched him before March starts. So, again, if you're kind of just now tuning into college basketball after football, you don't have anything, you're not a huge fan, watch them play this evening. Then I'll be followed by Arizona at Baylor. Big bounce back opportunity for the Wildcats, just on the heels of losing to Houston. These Big 12 scheduling stuff is crazy. Like how they play these Saturday, Monday games is insane. I don't know how the league office kind of allows that or how the independent schools allow it, but Arizona has to go to Baylor tonight after losing to Houston 48 hours ago. So that'll be 8 o'clock and 10 o'clock. Of course, because ESPN still doesn't recognize that college basketball games last 2.5 hours instead of 2 hours, those you'll miss the first 10 minutes of that Baylor game. The last thing I'll talk about today, I was getting a kick out of Saturday. I sit down in my man cave in my basement. I've got like 5 screens, enjoying all the games. There's 5 consecutive. There's a noon, 2, 4, 6, and 8 o'clock game on ESPN. And as somebody that, I cover a lot of high school events that are shootouts under one roof, or, certainly AAU events where obviously it's one game after another. I was laughing about if you had those 5 ESPN games, if you played them all on a neutral floor and played them truly back to back to back to back to back, Kentucky had the 8 o'clock game at Texas. Would that Kentucky game have started at 11 p.m. midnight? Like I'm not exaggerating. If you and I get it's a it's kind of a silly hypothetical, but like these games they last 2.5 hours, and at some point the TV markets are going to have to start adjusting for that, or else you're just going to have games that you want people watching. They're all starting on alternate channels. They're all started. Like the Kentucky game, it got held for 10 minutes. Then we had another 10 minutes of playing on ESPN News. So again, rant for a different day probably. But yeah, Duke at Virginia tonight, Arizona at Baylor tonight. Shane put this, are you from Hanover area in Indiana? I went to Hanover College. That's why I have the Hanover College flag here. 2014 Hanover College grad, played baseball and a little bit of tennis there as well, actually. But anyway, thank you all for tuning in. Over 300 people here watching live. I appreciate each and every one of you. If you are watching on YouTube, please make sure you are subscribed to the Brandon Ramsey College Basketball Show YouTube channel. If you are watching on Twitter, please make sure you're following me on at BRamseyKSR. And please like the video if you are watching on YouTube. Leave a comment if you're watching sometime in the future, and I'll get back at it. And let's see what else. Have a great week and enjoy a bunch of college hoops to come. Thanks for being here.